But I walk in and worship music is playing, and I was just moved by the music. And we sat fairly close to the front. I listened to the message that was being taught. And I remember it wasn't even the senior pastor at the time. It was the discipleship pastor. And he shared the gospel. And I was like, I need to do this. This is what I want.
Hey everyone, it's me, Julianne Hartman with The Journey, and I'm so happy that you're joining me today. We have a new journey for you. This is Kristina Carlton, and she's coming on to tell us her story about what happened to her physically. And I know that it's going to help so many people out there because there is so much need out there for a good testimony. Well, not just a good testimony, but a testimony, and also the revelation of the truth of God's word and healing coming forth. So, Kristina, thank you so much for coming on the journey.
Hi, Julianne. Thank you so much for having me. It is truly an honor to be here.
So I always like to start from the beginning as far as, like where, how were you raised? Did you know Jesus? Were you like christened as a baby and didn't know anything about it, but you had water sprinkled on you? Because a lot of times that's what happens. And they have, no one, that doesn't mean anything to an adult. And so what was your story now about how you came into the kingdom of God?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was sprinkled as a child. So I grew up in Germany, very small town. Right. Must have been the Holy Spirit. I grew up in Germany, small town, just north of Frankfurt. I've always been an American citizen, kind of a long story, but most people in town said they were Lutheran. My family said we're Lutheran. Others said they're Catholic. There were some that didn't claim either one. But really what that meant for us was we would go to church on holidays and weddings, funerals. And I don't remember God or the Bible being a big part of my life. So I don't feel like I grew up in a Christian home, right? I knew about God. And then as a Lutheran, we would go through confirmation at age 14. And that meant we would take, I think for a year, we all had to take a class once a week with a local pastor. And then for 2 years, I believe, we had to have a certain number of church attendances. And we had a little punch card. So every Sunday when you walk out of church, I think it was the pastor would stand at the exit and punch this little card. And if you didn't have enough attendances, then you couldn't go through confirmation. And so then I went through confirmation, and that was pretty much it. And I actually didn't give my life to Christ until September 2000. It was Labor Day weekend. I was in the United States at this point, living in Austin, Texas, going through a really hard time in my life. And, you have these times in your life when at the time it seems like a coincidence or that's just happened to happen. And later you can see God all over it, right? So going through a really hard time. And of all the friends I could have called I had good friends, but some probably weren't the best influence. I decided to call this woman that I'd worked with months prior. And her and her husband, it's Mary and Tom, came and got me for the weekend, brought me to their house with my dog. And they said, we're going to church on Sunday. So it wasn't an option, right? You're here, we're going to church. And I went to church that Sunday in Austin, Texas. And I remember walking in and worship music was playing. Now, the only thing I was used to was going to a church in Germany with pews. The pastor sat on this, I don't know, whatever you call it, above teaching his message, an organ player, hymns in German. It wasn't very moving for me as a child, but I walk in and worship music is playing, and I was just moved by the music. And we sat fairly close to the front. I listened to the message that was being taught. And I remember it wasn't even the senior pastor at the time. It was the discipleship pastor. And he shared the gospel. And I was like, I need to do this. This is what I want. So he led people through a prayer, and I prayed that prayer. And when we got back to Tom and Mary's house, I shared with them the decision I had made. And Mary, she was so awesome. She gave me a Bible and she gave me highlighters, the kind that don't bleed through, the Bible highlighters. And she said, you can write in your Bible and I want you to read the Bible. And she gave me Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ. She wanted me to read that book. And, at the time I was so foreign to reading the Bible. I'm like, well, where do I start? And she said, start with Psalm 91. And she said, and I'm so glad she did that. She said, I want you to personalize it. And I want you to cross out I and put your name in there. And I want you to read it and really read it and put your name in. And so that's how I started. And to this day, that's still my favorite Psalm. But that's how I gave my life to Christ. And then about a month later, they were doing baptisms. And I got the proper water baptism after I gave my life to Christ. Oh,
Okay, wow, that's pretty amazing. Just a little side note, many years ago, there was a company that was doing personalized Bibles. I don't know if I'm sure they're still around, but it was, you just put in your information, your name, and then where you grew up and then where you're living now. And so they personalized the whole thing. It was like Julianne Hartman of, such and such county. And it's the coolest things talk about making it personal. You're like, wait, I'm in here, instead of saying like, and
wow.
you were raised with Christ. It's like, and Julianne was raised with Christ. You're like, wow. This is really great. I love that Bible. Anyway, but now I want to go back because you skipped your whole life, which is I wanted you to talk about, because there's a lot there. So explain to me, what were you taught at a Lutheran church? Because I don't know anything about Lutheran churches. Like, what were you taught? Or what did you come away with that you went, oh, I know about this?
I came away with nothing, to be honest. I don't remember. I didn't go to church a lot, only that short period of time when I had to. And one, I have a really hard time recalling memories from my childhood. And I think it's because I lived in a constant state of fear. So I couldn't remember anything that was taught. When I went to that church in 2000, where I gave my life to Christ, I think that was the first time I heard that Jesus died on the cross for me, for people. I don't think, and maybe I'd heard it and, had forgotten it. But up until that point, at some point in my life, I claimed that I didn't believe in God. I think what I used to tell people is, well, I believe in something greater, some type of God. And I specifically said to people, but not the God as he's described in the Bible. I was very specific about that. So I never claimed to be an atheist or anything, but I said that I didn't believe in God. So I wish I could tell you what I came away with, but I don't remember a thing they taught, sadly.
Well, see, that can't happen because that's what's happening.
I know.
With our world today that no one knows about him. And then some churches are teaching that he's a punisher and he's a horrible person. And why would you want to follow him? So anyway, well, we're trying to change that with Healing Journeys today.
Yeah. And I think you are, right?
Time.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, that's the goal. And we've been at it now 5 years. So, all right. Well, then you said that most of your life, it was led by fear. So what was the cause of the fear?
So one cause, I think, was that my mom was a worrier. I think she probably would have been diagnosed with anxiety, which I now know is just living in a chronic state of fear, right? And she modeled that for me. And I've watched Dr. Kevin Chapman. I've watched his episodes on, anxiety and how it's something you learn. And then also my grandmother was a worrier. And I, going back a little bit, I grew up in Germany, but when I was 10, my dad was transferred to the United States. And so my brother and my mom and dad and I moved to the United States. I was 10, my brother was 12, but I couldn't speak English. So they took us to school the first day and I came out crying because I couldn't understand anyone. I'm like, I don't know what they were thinking. But so then my mom took me and my brother back to Germany and left us with her parents, my grandparents. And my grandmother was a worrier. And my grandfather he was a caring, kind person, but he was also, he had been a prisoner of war in Russia during World War II. He was very irritable. I'm sure, he would have been diagnosed with PTSD if that had been a thing back then. So that would have been in the 70s. So I think the fear came just from having a mom who modeled that for me. She was, I think that she was projecting her fears onto me, because anytime I wanted to try something, like I want to try ballet, I want to play the piano, she would come back with, "Oh, are you sure you're capable?" And when you're a little girl, if your mom questions, "Do you think you're capable?" It instills doubt in you. And I would say that's a stronghold I carried into adulthood, that I'm not capable. That was a big one for me. So I think that's where the fear came from, just being and I was just labeled as a fearful child. There wasn't any kind of, let's take you to a psychiatrist, or it's just, oh, she's fearful. And so that's a label I got too. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like also, fear can also model itself as insecurity as well. And so
Oh,
it sounds like
absolutely.
that you were dealing with that as well. It's interesting because I can hear a tiny bit of an accent from you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. I
Even
mean,
though you
it
learned,
was my first. Yeah, I learned English when I went back to Germany. So in Germany, English is a mandatory language. And so then when I went back, age 10 was when I started learning English in school. And then every summer, my brother and I would visit my parents in the US. So I did have exposure to, American people talking to people, plus learning it in school. And that really helped to, develop the language. But yes, I don't think I'll ever lose my accent completely. Yeah.
so all right. So then how many years did you spend with your grandparents without your parents?
8 years. Yeah.
Oh
From
my
age
God.
10 to 18. And it was, my grandparents were kind. They cared about us. And I used to say, oh, it's not so bad. But my friends would look at my life and say, how can this not be bad? Because they had a really small home. It was 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. So my brother and I didn't have our own rooms. I believe I slept on the couch. Well, first, when I was younger, I slept in my grandparents' bed with them. Then as I got older, I slept on the couch. My brother eventually had a room in the basement. He just, kind of fixed up. It wasn't really a basement that was meant to be lived in. So wasn't ideal. They couldn't help us with homework. They cared about us, but there were no I love yous or hugs, or, you come home from school, and there was some bullying when I was growing up. And I think my grandfather basically compared everything to being a prisoner of war in Russia, which I understand that, right? But when you're a kid and you feel like you're being teased and bullied in school, you want some comfort. So I don't want to make them sound like bad people. They were 66 and 67 when we came to live with them.
That's,
So
yeah,
very
they,
set in their ways. Yeah.
yes. Well, I mean,
So
yeah, that'd be like, well, for me, I'm 62 right now. Like to have kids come and live, it's like your whole life gets changed because
changes. Hmm.
you're just not in that state anymore, of
Absolutely.
school and homework and all that. And
Mm.
also just
Right.
keeping up with a young mind of things that, that you're thinking about and things that you need help with.
Hmm.
And wow. All right. Well,
Yeah.
then, so your parents would come. And so now you feel that came into your adult life, that fear. And, the problem
Absolutely.
is that it is modeled, unfortunately, by our parents, and we will take it on, if we're not careful. That's why you just really want to, for anybody out there that's watching this, that is trying to get pregnant or wanting to start a family, it's like, man, you got to nip that fear in the bud now, because you will model it for your child. And then you'll be the first one who goes, I don't know why she's so fearful or why he's so full of fear.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's really up to us. And a lot happens in the womb. And I'm not going to go into like, a spiritual, whatever, science or anything about that. But I just know that when you've got a baby alive on the inside of you and you're experiencing a lot of fear and anxiety, it's like, you cannot tell me that the place where you feel it the most was in your stomach, that a baby doesn't get
I know.
affected by it. There's no way.
Oh, I absolutely, absolutely. I
Yeah.
agree with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so now
So then,
let's move on to you're 18 and now what are you doing?
well, actually, around age 10, I developed an eating disorder. I developed anorexia, just very occupied with my body. Also, something my mom modeled for me. Later in my 20s, I also developed bulimia in addition to that. But when I was 18, I decided to move to the US, to where my parents were, which was outside of Dallas, Texas, and started working there. I had done an apprenticeship in Germany as a civil draftsperson. So I moved to the US, I'm living with them. got a job. And I think like 6 months later, my dad gets transferred back to Germany. It's just finally we're together as a family. I mean, I'm technically an adult, but then he gets moved back to Germany. He left. I stayed for a while, but then I also moved back to Germany. I moved to Munich, where my parents were at the time. Lived there for a while, worked for the Army and Air Force Exchange Service, same company my dad worked for. They're a U.S. retailer. They serve the military, the U.S. military, like they run the PX's theaters. And then, so I am introverted, living in constant fear of failure, fear of men, basically is what it was, dealing with anorexia and bulimia, just vacillating between the two. And when I was 24, I was working in an office. Everything was paper, right? We didn't have computers, but then we got computers in the office and they sent us to class and I learned some basic things like, it wasn't Microsoft Word back then, but it was similar, like a Word type, spreadsheet type programs. And I fell in love with it and I decided I want to go to college. And because I'm an American citizen and because I established Texas residency while living in Dallas, I decided to move to Austin, Texas. So at 24, I moved to Austin. I was actually dating someone at the time in Germany who was from Austin and encouraged me to go to Austin because UT is a good school. I was easily influenced at the time. Anything that somebody said to me, I'm like, maybe I should do that. But so I moved to Austin, got my own place, started working, start with the community college, then later transferred to UT. And so that would have been end of 1990. And then 1991, my dad gets diagnosed with lung cancer. So I got the phone call. I flew to Germany. He had, they removed the right side of his lung. They thought they got it all. And about a year later, they diagnosed him with a brain tumor. So they hadn't gotten it all and it spread to his brain. So he started treatment for cancer, chemo, radiation. There were certain things he couldn't do. I don't remember quite. I think he couldn't do chemo. He did radiation instead. And so I would fly to Germany whenever I could to be with my dad and spend some time with him. And it was extremely stressful. Graduated 1997. My mom and dad and my brother made it to the graduation. But then shortly after that, no, I graduated in 95, sorry. In 97, my dad passed away. So I'd gone to Germany for Christmas to be with him. He had been going downhill, came back home. And then like 12 days later, my mom called and said, he's got pneumonia. You have to come home. So I flew back again to Germany and he died before I got there. So a lot of moving, a lot of stress, and all of it with this underlying fear and this impostor syndrome and being mostly on my own, right? I was living by myself. I had friends, but I was a bit of a loner, so trying to just deal with life and all the stresses. And so after he passed away, the eating disorder got really bad. I started going to, I think it was Overeaters Anonymous, and I was prescribed Prozac, started having side effects from the Prozac. I was given Wellbutrin to counter the effects of the Prozac, and then I couldn't sleep. And then I was given Xanax so I could sleep. And then one day, I was giving into the food cravings. So I was going back and forth between anorexia and bulimia, and I just gave into the food and I was binging and purging at the time, and it didn't work. And I was so upset and felt so, because it was all about the body, or it felt like it was all about my body. I know it was about emotions and control now, but at the time I couldn't see that. And so I took a couple of Xanax so I could sleep the afternoon away because I didn't want to deal with the fear of weight gain. It was just really, really bad. And then I woke up and I thought, I can't do this. This is not. So I dumped all the medications, which was probably not a good idea because the withdrawal was for like 2 weeks. I felt awful, but made it through that and just continued to work. I had a full-time job. I was working as a computer programmer. That was what my degree was in. I bought a house. I got a dog. I think around 1996. So still dealing with the eating disorder. I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism and I was prescribed medication for that. I was given the more natural kind. It's called Armour Thyroid, I think. So I was never put on a synthetic medication, but I was on thyroid medication, this huge fear of weight gain. And I think from the outside, right, I think my life probably looked great. I had a career. I was making a lot of money. I had a house. I was in good shape. And I think inwardly, I was just consumed by this eating disorder and by this fear of not measuring up, not being good enough. And that's how I lived day in, day out. That was kind of my life.
Gosh,
And then
that's
yeah.
terrible. I'm so, it's just, it's so, it makes me feel so bad because there's so many people walking around like that. And they might put on a good, confident front, but really on the inside, they're really suffering. And that's what, those are the ones that I want to get to, the ones that won't tell you, the ones that tell you, the ones that scream it in your face, it's one thing, but man, the ones that just won't say anything, they're the ones suffering so badly. So let me ask you a question, because you kind of just said, oh yeah, I had I was anorexic when I was 10. What made you stop eating? Because I was anorexic, but I had a reason why I stopped eating. What made you stop eating?
I think it was a combination of things, just that feeling of being in control, wanting to control things. And my mom, she modeled that. She was very concerned about her size and what she looked like. And then one summer, as I went to visit my parents in the US, and it was one of those summers, sometimes you just have this growth spurt. And I came back and I had this growth spurt, because we always went for, a couple of months. I think we went to the US and I'd lost some weight and I came back and everybody in my town was like, wow, you're so thin. You look amazing. And right, it's just that message of, oh, okay, thin is good. I've got to keep this up. I'm getting attention. And I don't know if it had something to do maybe with wanting to be liked, because I also had this idea that people don't like me, that they don't love me. And even if they love me, I don't know if they like me. Like I remember being afraid as a kid to invite people to my birthday party or kids because I had a fear that they wouldn't show up. So I think that it was a combination of I can control things, I can control food because my life felt out of control, and thin is good. Thin means attention and thin means pretty. I think that's what it was for me.
Yeah. Okay. And so how long were you? So you said a couple years?
Anorexia?
Yeah.
Or, no, I think I had the total for the eating disorder was 40 years, 40. Now towards the end, it wasn't as extreme. I wasn't, in complete starvation. I had stopped the binging and purging, but it was still that every day being consumed with food in my body. That's kind of what ruled my life from the moment I got up till I went to bed.
Isn't that crazy that how your body just, I know our bodies are so incredibly strong that we can abuse them the way, even with drugs or alcohol or something like that, we can abuse them, but they just hang on. It's
incredible.
It really is. Yeah. So 40 years, my gosh.
Oh, yeah. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but I remember going to a doctor, this is much later, and my digestion was not good. And she said, oh, your digestion, it'll never be good again because of all the damage you've done to your body with the bulimia. You'll never have a normal digestion again. Well, we know God is bigger than that. So my digestion is great now and I'm past the eating disorder. But yeah, it took a long time. And, thinking about what you said with people who don't share what's going on, right? I was so used to from a child just saying, oh, I'm fine, because we were not, I don't want to say not allowed, but I think my grandparents didn't know how to deal with emotions coming from me or my brother. And so you had to stuff your emotions. It just wasn't acceptable. So you just learned to say, oh, I'm good. And I think I carried that with me too into adulthood. And I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to ask for help. And I think those are all things that came out of childhood. Perfectionism, certainly people pleasing. I think we're all set up in child abandonment. I think that's where feelings of abandonment and rejection came in, I think, as a 10-year-old. And I wish I had talked to my mom before she passed away about why they made the decision to take us back to Germany. Why not take us out of school for a year and teach us English? I never had that conversation with her. But I just, it just doesn't make sense to me that they would have done that. And yeah, anyway, it's kind of a part of the story I'll never learn.
As I was going to say, as a parent, sometimes we can't figure out why, or we can't figure out why our parents made certain decisions. Then you become a parent, you're like, oh, I see how we came to that, how they came to that conclusion. There's no rehearsal for parenting. You have your kids and, it's go time.
You do the best.
So we do the best that we can. And it's not always the best, but we do the best that we're doing. One thing that we've learned, you've mentioned Dr. Kevin Chapman, who is one of our teachers, who's awesome, but he's very big on like teaching us that, fear is now, anxiety is future.
Right.
Yeah. And depression is what's happened in the past. So fear is now, anxiety is future, depression is in the past. So the anxiety that you were experiencing, that was just like, how are you going to face every day? Is that what it was about? I mean, that's what you were feeling?
I used to call it anxiety, but after listening to that 4-part series by Dr. Chapman on the spirit of fear, I'm like, I was living in fear. It was just that everyday fear of not being good enough and fear of failure and fear of, I would show up to work and just walk in with this feeling of, why do I even have this job? I can't believe they gave me this job. Can't they see I can't handle it? I did well in my jobs. I always got good performance reviews and wasn't perfect, right? But so I think it was just fear of the present. And there were times I had anxiety about future events, but mostly it was just fear of just every day.
Did you ever talk to anybody about that? Of like, and just saying, like you said, like you're walking in going, I don't even know if I deserve this job. Like, why I probably had too much pride to ever say that before I became a Christian, but because that was my personality. But like, what made you think that you wouldn't have deserved to have a certain job?
Because I didn't feel like I was good enough, smart enough to handle it. I just felt undeserving. And I think it just all, obviously stemmed from my childhood in some capacity.
Now, let me just say this, because this should have happened to me, but here I am. I graduated high school and they gave me like a courtesy diploma of like, don't come back, right? Like, get her out of here. But then I went to work on the game show Jeopardy in the writing department for 15 years. Yeah. Talk about not feeling like you were supposed to be there. Oh my gosh. I always kind of thought of it as a joke. This is funny. Like, how did I get here? But so for you, it's like, was it that you felt like you weren't qualified for the job, or just that?
Yes. Just didn't. I think it was just extreme imposter syndrome, like not being able to see that, I am smart. I can learn. I'm intelligent. I just never felt that way about myself, even though, I held jobs as a computer programmer and worked on big projects, and it was never good enough, right? And whatever I did, and always looking for more degrees, going back to school to earn a certificate, or, once I achieve this next thing, maybe then I'm good enough. Maybe then I'm smart enough. And it was never enough. So and at the time,
no, go ahead.
Well, at the time, I think it was just my normal. I just didn't know anything else. I think I was just living in this state of fear. And while I knew it was unpleasant, it was almost normalized. Well, she's a fearful child, and that's just the way I am, right? Those things we say, I get it from my mom, and you can't change it. So yeah, that's just the place I lived in. And I just thought it was normal for me anyways.
Right. I was just thinking that, did somebody say that to you, or you just took it upon yourself to think that way about yourself?
I think it's the whole thing with my mom doubting my abilities. And then also my grandparents. I remember when I wanted to help my grandparents with, working in the yard or cooking, they would just say, "Oh, you're not capable." I heard that a lot as a kid. And I don't think they were trying to be mean. Again, I think it was more a matter of they are close to 70 and they don't want to teach a little kid, I'm guessing, right, how to help them work. They just want to get it done and be done with it. But I heard that a lot as a kid, and I took that with me. And I think that's a big reason why I believe that as an adult. Those
That was,
strongholds, right, that are built. And it
yeah.
felt true to me. Yeah.
Yes. That's what
Mhm.
that's what the facade is that they're looking,
Yeah.
you're looking at it as if it was real. Well, we're out of
Yeah.
time already, Kristina, so we're gonna have to
Okay.
continue next week. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to our viewers, our subscribers that are watching this today. I like to dig into people's backgrounds because this is where we usually find the foundation of where a sickness might have started. And that's now we're going to go into her story for the next episode. So I hope you join us for that, and make sure that you're always sharing these videos, because you guys are our marketing department. You are the one that tells your friends and your family, like, hey, you should hear this interview. It sounds a lot like your life. And we get that all the time. So please share, and then also visit our website at healingjourneystoday.com, because we've got so many amazing things going on in Healing Journeys Today that the only way you're going to find out about all of it is if you go to our website. So I'd really appreciate you doing that. And thank you for partnering with us. I cannot, we as all of our teachers, we can't do this without you. So we're so thankful, and we love you so much, and we'll see you next time on the journey. Bye-bye.